There is one mistake people make when they deal with an empath. They think kindness means weakness. They think silence means blindness. They think patience means permission. And that is exactly why people who lie to an empath always destroy themselves in the end. Because what most people don't understand is this: an empath does not listen to your words first. They listen to your energy. Before you even speak, they already feel the shift in your behavior. They notice the hesitation in your voice, the tension behind your smile, the emptiness behind your compliments, the darkness hiding inside your fake loyalty. You can fool intelligent people with logic. You can fool emotional people with manipulation. But you cannot fool someone who feels human nature like a sixth sense. And that is what terrifies people about empaths. They know things they were never told. They see patterns nobody else notices. They can stand in a room full of applause and still detect the one person secretly hoping that. I fail. That's why liars become uncomfortable around empaths. Because deep down, they know the mask won't survive forever. See, when you lie to an empath, they usually know. The frightening part is, they often pretend they don't. Not because they are weak, not because they are stupid, but because they are studying you, watching you, giving you opportunity after opportunity to tell the truth voluntarily. And every single time you continue lying, you reveal more about your character than the original lie ever could. An empath watches consistency. They watch emotional reactions. They watch timing. They watch how your eyes change when certain topics appear. While everyone else is reacting emotionally, the empath is silently collecting evidence, piece by piece, energy by energy, until your entire personality becomes predictable to them. That's why the most dangerous moment is not when the empath discovers the lie. The most dangerous moment is when they finally stop explaining away your behavior, because empaths love deeply, too deeply sometimes. They give people the benefit of the doubt when nobody else would. They fight for relationships most people would abandon. They forgive things that should never be forgiven because they always try to understand the pain behind people's actions. But the second an empath realizes their compassion is being exploited, something changes permanently inside them. And if you've never witnessed that transformation before, you are not prepared for what comes next. Because the empath who once begged for honesty suddenly becomes emotionally unreachable. The empath who once over-explained their feelings suddenly becomes silent, cold, focused, detached. Not out of revenge, out of realization. They realized they were pouring love into someone who was feeding on it without respect. And here is the terrifying truth most manipulators learn too late. An empath's silence is not weakness. It is the sound of emotional death. The moment they are emotional, lie disconnect from you, you lose access to something you may never find again in another human being. Genuine loyalty, genuine understanding, genuine emotional depth. See, fake people think everyone is replaceable because they themselves are shallow. But real empaths are rare, extremely rare. They make people feel seen, safe, understood. And the tragedy is most people only recognize that value after they destroy it. That's why liars panic when an empath goes quiet, because they can feel the shift. Suddenly the empath stops arguing, stops chasing, stops trying to fix things, stops reacting emotionally to manipulation. And that silence becomes unbearable because manipulators survive through emotional control. But once an empath emotionally detaches, the manipulator loses power. The games stop working. The guilt trips stop working. The fake apologies stop working. And now the liar is standing face to face with the one thing they were trying to avoid the entire time: consequences. You see, we empaths don't expose people immediately because they hope people choose honesty on their own. But when the line is finally crossed, the empath doesn't explode emotionally the way toxic people do. They become calm, and that calmness is terrifying, because now the decision is final. An empath reaches a point where they no longer need closure. They no longer need explanations. They no longer need revenge. They simply see you clearly, completely clearly. And once an empath truly sees who you are without illusions, they can never unsee it again. That is why people who lied to empaths often become obsessed afterward, because the empath they took for granted suddenly disappears emotionally forever. And now they realize something painful: nobody else loved them with that level of sincerity. Nobody else listened that deeply. Nobody else believed in them that hard. They lost someone who saw the best in them while they kept showing the worst. And now they must live with the memory of destroy. We, NG, one of the few real souls they ever encountered. People think breaking an empath creates weakness. Number. Breaking an empath creates wisdom. It creates emotional intelligence sharpened through betrayal. It creates boundaries forged through pain. It creates intuition that becomes almost impossible to deceive a second time. The empath who survives betrayal becomes incredibly dangerous because now they still have the same heart, but they also have pattern recognition. Now they recognize manipulation faster. Now they detect fake intentions instantly. Now they understand that not everybody deserves access to their kindness. And once an empath learns that lesson, they become unstoppable. Because healed empaths stop seeking validation. They stop begging to be chosen. They stop shrinking themselves to make toxic people comfortable. They stop confusing attention with love. And the moment that happens, their energy changes completely. They walk differently, speak differently, see differently. Suddenly, toxic people cannot control them anymore because the empath no longer fears losing people who bring chaos into their life. That is freedom, real freedom. Most people walk into a room listening for words. An empath walks into a room feeling tension. That is the difference. Before a sentence is even spoken, before a smile is even fully formed, before a handshake is complete, an empath already senses the emotional weather around them. They notice the energy nobody else notices. They feel the crack behind confidence. They feel the jealousy hidden behind compliments. They feel the resentment buried underneath fake support. And this is exactly why people become uncomfortable around empaths without even understanding why. Because an empath doesn't just see your actions. They feel your intentions. A liar believes deception is about controlling language. They rehearse stories. They calculate excuses. They manipulate details. But they forget one thing: human beings leak truth through energy long before words arrive. The body leaks truth. The eyes leak truth. Silence leaks truth. And an empath catches all of it like a storm radar detecting lightning before the thunder hits. That is why some people feel exposed around empaths even when nothing has been said out loud. Their soul recognizes danger. Their mask recognizes a threat. An empath notices when your voice changes around certain topics. They notice the tiny delay before you answer a question. They notice how your body becomes stiff when truth enters the room. They notice how fake people over-explain simple things because lies require maintenance. Truth is effortless. Lies are heavy. And an empath feels that emotional weight instantly. They can sit beside someone smiling perfectly and still feel darkness screaming underneath their skin. That ability terrifies manipulators because manipulators survive through illusion. And illusions cannot survive in the presence of someone who feels deeper than surface appearances. The frightening part is that empaths rarely expose lies immediately. That's what most people misunderstand. Empaths are not impulsive. They are observant. They sit quietly while the other person keeps talking, keeps acting, keeps pretending, unknowingly revealing more and more of themselves with every unnecessary explanation. While everyone else is distracted by charm, the empath is studying inconsistencies. While everyone else is hypnotized by appearances, the empath is listening to emotional frequency. And energy never lies for long. Some people think empaths are emotional because they are weak. Empaths are emotional because they are aware. They feel what most people are numb to. They can sense emotional shifts the way animals sense earthquakes before they happen. They know when a room suddenly changes after one toxic person enters. They know when someone secretly resents them while pretending to support them publicly. They know when love becomes obligation instead of sincerity. Why? They know when someone's loyalty starts fading long before betrayal actually happens. And the terrifying part is they usually stay silent about it because they are hoping to be wrong. That is the tragedy of an empath. They sense truth early, but their heart keeps searching for reasons to believe in people anyway. They will excuse behavior. They will rationalize red flags. They will tell themselves maybe the person is struggling, maybe the person is hurting, maybe the person didn't mean it. Because empaths naturally look for pain behind behavior instead of immediately condemning people. But manipulators mistake that compassion for blindness. They think the empath doesn't notice. They think they are getting away with deception. They celebrate too early, because every lie leaves fingerprints on human energy. Every fake smile creates emotional static. Every hidden intention creates tension that an empath absorbs like smoke filling lungs. And eventually, the empath reaches a moment where all the tiny inconsistencies connect together like pieces of a horrifying puzzle. Suddenly, the jokes make sense. The strange behavior makes sense. The emotional distance makes sense. The fake loyalty makes sense. And once that pattern becomes visible, the illusion collapses instantly. That is why people are shocked when empaths finally walk away. They say things like, "You never told me you felt this way." But the empath did tell them, just not always with words, through silence, through emotional exhaustion, through repeated attempts to fix things peacefully, through patience that was slowly dying inside. But manipulators only understand loud reactions. They ignore quiet disappointment because they mistake calmness for acceptance. An empath can sit in a conversation and feel the emotional imbalance immediately. They know when someone is speaking from ego instead of authenticity. They know when someone is fishing for validation instead of connection. They know when someone is emotive, only draining everyone around them while pretending to be the victim. That's why toxic people often accuse empaths of overthinking, because manipulators hate people who notice patterns. They hate people who question emotional inconsistencies. They hate people who cannot easily be hypnotized by appearances. And here is what makes an empath truly dangerous. They remember energy more than words. People can forget exact conversations, but empaths remember how someone made them feel. They remember the discomfort, the tension, the hidden hostility, the emotional confusion. Their intuition stores emotional evidence inside the body itself. That's why an empath can reconnect with someone months later and instantly feel the same toxic energy return within seconds. Energy has memory. The world teaches people to trust words more than instincts. That is why so many people betray themselves trying to appear reasonable while ignoring what their soul already knows. But empaths suffer whenever they ignore intuition, because intuition is their internal alarm system. The moment they betray that feeling, chaos enters their life. That's why mature empaths eventually stop apologizing for what they sense. They stop needing external proof for internal truth, because experience taught them something painful. Every time they ignored their intuition, they paid for it emotionally later. An empath can detect fake love because fake love always demands performance. Real love creates peace. Fake love creates anxiety. Real love feels safe. Fake love feels confusing. Real loyalty stays consistent in private and public. Fake loyalty changes depending on who is watching. Empaths feel these differences immediately, even when they cannot logically explain them yet. Their nervous system reacts before their mind fully understands why. And that is what people fail to realize about empaths. Their sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a survival mechanism sharpened through emotional experience. They became observant because life forced them to read invisible danger. They learned to study tone, behavior, mood shifts, and emotional energy because trusting words alone once destroyed them. So now they notice everything: the forced smile, the hidden jealousy, the emotional manipulation disguised as concern, the passive-aggressive tone hidden inside fake kindness. Nothing escapes someone who has trained themselves to survive emotional chaos. That is why lying to an empath is one of the biggest mistakes a person can make. Because even if the empath stays silent, even if they continue loving you, even if they continue giving chances, the truth is already echoing inside them. And once enough emotional evidence accumulates, the empath no longer needs confession. Your energy already confessed for you. People think betrayal destroys an empath. They think pain weakens them. They think heartbreak turns them fragile. But they completely misunderstand what happens when an empath survives suffering. Pain does not erase an empath's power. Pain reveals it. Because the empath who rises after betrayal is no longer operating from innocence alone. Now they move with awareness. Now they move with pattern recognition. Now they move with emotional intelligence sharpened by survival. And that transformation becomes one of the most dangerous things a manipulative person will ever encounter. See, before betrayal, an empath loves with almost limitless openness. They trust deeply. They give endlessly. They see potential in broken people. They fight for relationships that other people would abandon instantly. They carry emotional weight that was never theirs to carry because their heart naturally wants to heal others. But toxic people mistake that kindness for weakness. They see forgiveness and assume there are no boundaries. They see patience and assume there are no limits. They see empathy and assume there are no consequences, until the empath finally breaks. And when an empath breaks, something inside them awakens that was sleeping before. Not hatred, not cruelty, clarity. Suddenly they begin seeing the patterns they ignored for years. They replay conversations and recognize manipulation hidden inside simple words. They recognize how they were emotionally drained while constantly being told they were too sensitive. They recognize how their loyalty was weaponized against them. They recognize how they kept shrinking themselves just to maintain relationships with people who were never willing to meet them halfway. And that awareness changes everything forever. Because once an empath understands the difference between helping someone and sacrificing themselves for someone, they become unstoppable. The healed empath no longer tries to rescue people determined to destroy themselves. They no longer chase emotionally unavailable people hoping love will magically transform them. They no longer beg for honesty from people addicted to deception. They no longer explain the I are worth to people committed to misunderstanding them. The energy shifts completely. And when that shift happens, toxic people lose access to emotional control they once depended on. This is why some people become terrified when an empath heals. Because the empath who once tolerated disrespect suddenly develops boundaries. Real boundaries. Not temporary emotional reactions. Permanent standards. And manipulators hate boundaries because boundaries expose intentions. A selfish person becomes angry the second access is restricted. A toxic person becomes uncomfortable the second emotional control disappears, and the healed empath notices all of it instantly now. That is what pain taught them. Pain taught them that not everybody deserves unlimited access to their heart. Pain taught them that consistency matters more than promises. Pain taught them that real love brings peace, not confusion. Pain taught them that loyalty without reciprocity becomes self-destruction. Pain taught them too. Empathy without boundaries becomes an invitation for exploitation. And once those lessons become part of the empath's identity, they stop living emotionally hungry for validation. That is where real power begins. The healed empath no longer fears losing people who disrespect them because they finally understand something life-changing. Losing toxic people is not loss. It is released. They stop romanticizing suffering. They stop calling emotional chaos passion. They stop confusing trauma bonds with soul connections. They stop accepting bare minimum effort from emotionally manipulative people. And the second that happens, their entire presence changes. You can feel it when a healed empath walks into a room. There is calmness in them now. A different kind of confidence. Not loud arrogance. Not ego. Quiet certainty. The kind that comes from surviving emotional wars nobody ever saw. The kind that comes from rebuilding themselves alone after betrayal shattered their trust. The kind that comes from learning how to sit in loneliness without abandoning themselves for attention. And that energy becomes magnetic. Because healed empaths no longer seek approval desperately. They no longer perform for acceptance. They no longer betray their intuition just to keep people comfortable. They trust themselves now, deeply. And manipulators cannot easily control people who trust their own instincts. That is why toxic people often call healed empaths cold. Not because the empath lost emotion, because the empath stopped offering emotional access to people who abuse it. There is a massive difference. The healed empath still loves deeply, still cares deeply, still feels deeply. But now their empathy has wisdom attached to it. Now they pay attention to actions instead of fantasies. Now they observe consistency instead of getting hypnotized by words. Now they understand that someone can be wounded and still dangerous. Someone can be struggling and still destructive. Someone can have trauma and still choose manipulation. That awareness protects them from repeating cycles that once nearly destroyed them. And perhaps the most powerful transformation of all, healed empaths stop trying to convince people of their value. That desperate need disappears. They stop over-explaining themselves, stop chasing closure, stop fighting for one-sided relationships, stop begging people to communicate honestly. Stop trying to earn basic respect, because they finally realize something heartbreaking but freeing at the same time. The right people never required them to abandon themselves in order to be loved. That realization creates emotional freedom most people never experience in their lifetime. Now the empath becomes selective with energy, selective with trust, selective with access. Not out of bitterness, out of self-respect. And self-respect terrifies manipulative people because manipulation only works when someone doubts their own worth. But healed empaths no longer doubt themselves the same way. They know what emotional exhaustion feels like. They know what betrayal feels like. They know what it feels like to pour love into empty souls hoping effort will create loyalty. And because they survived that darkness, they no longer tolerate emotional games disguised as relationships. That is why healed empaths often become incredibly successful in life afterward. Their energy is no longer trapped inside toxic cycles. Their focus returns. Their creativity returns. Their confidence returns. The emotional weight that once drained them disappears, and suddenly all that emotional depth becomes fuel instead of suffering. People who underestimated them become shocked by the transformation, because the empath they once manipulated is gone. Now there is someone stronger standing in their place. Someone who still has compassion but no longer ignores red flags. Someone who still has kindness but no longer sacrifices peace for approval. Someone who, still believes in love but refuses to beg for it. Someone who can walk away from disrespect without needing revenge. And that kind of emotional strength is rare, extremely rare, because anybody can become cruel after pain. Anybody can become bitter after betrayal. Anybody can close their heart permanently after disappointment. But the healed empath does something far more powerful. They remain kind without becoming naive. They remain loving without becoming self-destructive. They remain open without losing discernment. They survive darkness without becoming darkness. And nothing is more dangerous than a person who has suffered deeply, healed honestly, and finally realized their own value.